Good morning. Welcome to the Accounts Payable and Accounts Receivable Deep Dive session. My name is Annette Brewer, and joining me is Christy Weekly. Christy and I are both program managers focused on the financials area in AX. Christy and I have been looking forward to this presentation now for several months, and we are really excited to be here. I'm kind of glad that we're the first session of the day because I've had a little bit of nervous energy, but lots of excitement to show you these features today. So this presentation today will focus on both accounts payable and accounts receivable. For accounts payable, we'll take a look at the integration between operations and the finance area. I'll show you how to ensure smooth processes by defining your accounting policies up front while still allowing those end users to override policies when necessary. We'll also take a look at invoice entry tasks, and then I'll show you how invoice policies in AX can be tailored to match your real-life business practices. Christy will be showing you accounts receivable, and she'll be focused on the free text invoice area. In that area, she'll show you the free text invoice templates as well as invoice corrections. And then we'll go ahead and we'll finish off the demonstration portion by showing you the new collection process in Dynamics AX 2012. Now, before I get started, I'd just like to take a minute to talk about personas. So focus on the right-hand side of our slide there. And personas are something that we reference quite frequently at Microsoft. They're simply fictitious characters that represent real people in the business world that we've interviewed throughout the years. So for our session, for accounts payable, we're going to focus on April. She's our accounts payable clerk, and she typically enters in the vendor invoices. And as such, she's often the first person that will notice the matching discrepancies. We also have Alicia, our purchasing agent or our buyer, and she helps April reconcile those invoice matching discrepancies. On the accounts receivable side, we have Arnie, our AR clerk, and we have Connie rounding out the collections area. Now, as I was preparing for the demonstration, I was reminded of a story that I wanted to share with you. It actually happened 20 years ago, and it was my first customer visit. And this was to a very large customer. They had over 100,000 items in their inventory. And they also had a large accounts payable finance area. And my job was to, I guess you'd say shadow, if you would, the personnel in the inventory area out in the warehouse in the morning. And then I spent the afternoon with April in the finance area in the afternoon. And I had a little bit of nervous energy as I arrived that morning. And I arrived at the warehouse, though, and my nerves were gone. I was just amazed. This warehouse was huge. You know, there were forklifts moving product around. There were shipping containers in there, and the shelving just went all the way to the ceiling. I couldn't even see the top product. So my job was to shadow this receivings clerk, and things went well. We watched the products move around. I was learning a lot. But something rather peculiar happened. Every once in a while, he'd go over to the wall and he'd grab a clipboard, make a few notations, and then put it back. Well, the second time that happened, my curiosity kind of got the best of me. So I asked him, you know, what is that information? What are you doing with this? And his answer was so simple, but it surprised me. He said, I don't know, it's just some extra paperwork accounting needs. So it was clear that there wasn't a lot of integration between that operations and accounting department. And I saw the same type of thing that afternoon. I spent the afternoon with an April persona. And again, this was 20 years ago, so it was all very manual. You know, she had paper copies of the invoice on her desk, and she had manila folders that had the purchase orders as well as the receipts. And for most of the afternoon, it went very well. She was matching up those documents. But every once in a while, you could tell that she got a little bit irritated, and it was when those invoices didn't match the paperwork from operations. We see that kind of thing a lot. That scene has played out many times as I've done customer visits since that very first one. And there's just a natural tension between operations and accounting. And I'm not saying that's adversarial at all in nature. It's just a natural tension that occurs because of the differing goals of the two departments. You know, you think of that warehouse I was in. There were forklifts, they were honking, they were beeping as they were backing up. It's a noisy place, lots of activity, and it's error prone. And think of accounting. The whole goal there is just accuracy. And sometimes those two goals just clash. So that's what causes that tension. And with AX 2012, we really did do a lot of thinking about that tension that exists. And we made a conscious push to really better integrate those operations and accounting functions. So this first demo, I think, does a pretty good job of showing off that functionality. It's a really uncomplicated demo. I have a purchase order that I've already entered in my system. And I'm going to show you some of the accounting policies behind that purchase order. I'll also show you quite a few features in the vendor invoice. We'll continue working through that PO and take it into the vendor invoice. So I'm going to switch over here into the product. Okay, and as I had mentioned, I've already entered in a purchase order. And the purpose of this demo is just to show you how little that Alicia, or that operations person, really needs to think about the accounting in AX 2012 now. Let me show you this purchase order. And on this particular purchase order, let's pretend that we have a new spring campaign for marketing. And they've asked me to enter some work shirts for them. Little shirt, probably like I'm wearing today, with some logo on the side, kind of to advertise their campaign. And all of the expenses for this spring campaign are going to be divided across 3 departments, across our East sales, our West sales, and our marketing departments. So we have our purchase order here, and we'd assume that someone from operations, like an Alicia, would have entered that for us. I'm going to click into the header view, and I'll go ahead and edit this PO. And you can see we have a new field here on the purchase order. It's a financial dimension template. And the template serves kind of as a pattern. It defaults the dimensions onto all of the non-stocked items. And you'll see we use dimension templates, not just in the purchase order area, but in other areas for transaction entry. So let me go back. I want to show you the setup of this. This is something that finance would do. It's over in the general ledger area. I'll take you to setup, financial dimension default templates. There's a couple things to note about this. Let me just make this bigger for you. I know in the back you can't see, so I'll really try and talk to these. The template consists of a template ID, and then in the middle of the form, what you have are percentages that you can split across your dimensions. In this case, what I've done is I've set up 30% is going to go to my dimension department called East Sales, 10% is going to go to marketing, and 60% will automatically go to the sales. Now this split will automatically happen on the purchase order. So let's go back to the PO, and we'll take a look at that. So the PO entry person doesn't even need to think about this type of thing. Oh, I actually have my PO open twice here. Let me close that one. So that's the campaign. Another thing that I wanted to just note here, just draw your attention. We still have, of course, posting profiles in AX 2012. That principle has not changed in 2009, but just for the purposes of this demo, I wanted to remind you about that. This particular posting profile drives the downstream vendor invoice accounting. It will be my accounts payable summary account that will be pulled here. Likewise, on this purchase order, you'll see the inventory posting profiles come into play. So just a note there for you to look at that. Let me go back to the line view, and let's take a look at how all of this comes together. I'm going to go under Financials, Distribute Amounts, and you're going to see the accounting distribution form here. This is new for Dynamics AX 2012, and accounting distributions define how to account for an amount on a transaction. It's not the accounting entry itself, it's just one side of the entry. And what you're seeing here is the side that's geared towards the operation side. It is the debit side. You'll also see, as Christy goes through her demonstrations, she'll show you on the sales side how this plays out. So let's talk about the form itself. On the left-hand side, you have the purchase order, the lines on there, so you can see my work shirt is contained in the tree view. I also have a line for my tax. My tax is distributed on here as well. If I had miscellaneous charges, which I don't in this case, they would also show in this tree view. Now on the right-hand side, kind of the more predominant side of this form, you see the financial dimension templates come into play. Let me get the account control here so you can see this maybe a bit better. We have an account control, which is new for Dynamics AX 2012, and it really does a great job of showing you graphically the breakout of your accounts with all of the dimensions that have come into play here. My main account in this case is coming from the inventory posting profile. It's my expense for this particular work shirt. The departments are driven by that financial dimension template that I showed you at the beginning. So if we take a look at my first line, it's for West sales, and it has automatically distributed 60% to that. If I click now on my second line, that's marketing for 10%, and then we have East sales for 30%. So that's where the dimension template came into play. Let's talk about a few of the options here as well. You can distribute these distributions by either percent, amount, or by quantity. There are a few buttons and controls here. I'll go ahead and select the split function. And what the system does in this case is it creates a copy of the line that you had highlighted when you chose the split button so that you could easily enter in a new percentage. If you wanted to split that to another department, you could certainly do that here. There's a distribute equally, which of course just spreads across all of the lines. Since I have 4 lines, it's distributed 25% now at this point. And if you really mess up, there is a reset button that will delete all of the lines that you've entered, all of the changes that you've made, and it will recreate those distributions, again, according to those accounting policies that you've set up. So it goes back and it looks at that dimension template, and it also looks at the posting profile from inventory, defaults it all nicely back in this area for you. There is an indication of whether you're fully distributed at the bottom of the form. In this case, I am 100% distributed. I'll go ahead and close the form. If you're not distributed, there are some nice icons that show up, as well as you would get an error message, warning message, really, when you're coming out of that form to tell you that you have an imbalanced situation. All right, all of the information on that form that we were just in, that distribute amounts form, is securable. So if you don't want your operations side to go in and be editing those distributions, you can secure it away through security. But it's there if you do need to use it, it's there for the use. All right, I want to point out one more thing on this purchase order. I want to point out the sales tax. And the sales tax calculation in AX 2012 has not changed in principle at all. We still do a comparison of the item sales tax group to the sales tax group, and we find the common codes, and that's what we tax. That's what we base the percentage on. The reason that I'm really pointing this out, though, is I want you to remember that we have $50 of tax, kind of tuck that away in your memory, and we have made changes on the vendor invoice. The change that we made on the vendor invoice is that you can now override the tax. You can make the adjustment right on the vendor invoice, which you couldn't do in AX 2009. So I'll show that to you in just a minute here, but go ahead and tuck this away from memory. So all right, let's go ahead and close this. And I'll confirm this purchase order. So I hope you got an understanding of the capabilities that we saw here. It's very easy. The goal really is to provide the ability to override those accounting policies if you need to, but they are there, they're defaulting. If you never want to go into that distribution form, you don't have to. It's all going to default in there just fine for you. So let's go ahead. We're going to go to the vendor invoice list page. It's under accounts payable, and we'll go vendor invoices, pending vendor invoices. Now our pending list page shows you your saved or your unposted invoices. In AX 2012, we do provide the ability to import through the web service, the vendor invoices. We also have a vendor portal where you can push vendor invoices into the system. This is really that landing spot where those vendor invoices would show up in the system. I'm going to just go ahead and work with that PO that I just had up on the form. So I'm going to create a new invoice. Let me just enter in the vendor ID and an invoice number before I forget, because sometimes I do that. Okay, as you've seen in other sessions, if you've seen anything about AX 2012, you know that we have a new user interface. And this particular form, the vendor invoice form, was one of the forms that we used in those usability tests with real live Aprils and Phyllis's. So they came into our office, we had them run through a number of tasks, and what they do is they really talk as they're going through the tasks, and we can see where they stumble. Then we'd go back to the drawing board, we'd have them come back in a few days, and we'd keep retesting, keep iterating. So the results of those tests are really what you see here today. And what we came up with as a pattern for these transaction forms is really one form with two different views. What I mean by that, the views are right here, and there's a show part of the action pane. We have a line view, which is the default view. And the line view consists of an invoice header. It's very stripped down. It just has like the IDs as well as the dates that are pertinent. And then we have a line section. And then below the lines, there's a line details section that contains every field that's on the line. All of those default from somewhere, so it's not commonly accessed. We also have this header view. That's the other part of the one form, two view idea. The header contains every single field on the header of the invoice. So I'll just go ahead, I'll start opening up some of these tabs, and you get an idea. You can see if April had to enter every single one of these, she would not get much work done during the day. There's a lot of data in here. That's why it's not our default view, because everything in this header view defaults in from somewhere, whether it's from the purchase order or from the vendor itself. So it's not a view that we expect people to be in very often. Again, the line view is really the one that we expect people to be working in. So I'll go back here to the line view. And while I'm in here, before I even start entering my document, I do want to talk about the ways that you can create invoices in AX 2012. Now, I'd alluded to the fact that we have a web service option, and that is new, again, for AX 2012. It connects with our AIF framework, and we provide the schema out of the box, and you can actually import the invoices into the system, into the client, using that methodology. It does support workflow, so if you wanted to run those imported invoices through some type of workflow, for instance, for matching, you could even automatically post those invoices. So it's kind of a touchless scenario where you could just push it in, and if you had workflow, you could automatically post those invoices. Another option that we have outside of the client is we have a vendor portal where vendors can securely log on and create their own invoices. And not only can they create their own invoices, but they also are able to track the status of their invoice, because we now track whether the invoice has been paid, and we expose that out on the vendor portal. And ultimately, that will reduce calls. You know, they won't be calling in as much, wondering, is the check in the mail or not, that type of thing. So those are our two options kind of outside of the client. Now, inside of the client, we have the ability to create vendor invoices based on purchase orders, just like you could in AX 2009, as well as by product receipts. And I mentioned the product receipts because that was new in 2009, and a lot of people don't even realize we have that capability. So the example would be if your vendor typically invoices every time they ship, that's perfect. If you wanted to create your invoice based on that packing slip information, you can do that in the system. And the way that you do that is by setting this quantity default for lines to product receipt quantity. That lights up this retrieve product receipts. Now in my case, I'm going to just work with that PO that we had before. It's PO 408. And the lines should default in. We should see my work shirt come on in. And this looks great, but let's change up the scenario a little bit. Let's say that my paper copy of the invoice has another line on it. It has a line for some consulting design work. So let's pretend in my scenario that Alicia created that PO, sent it to the vendor, and when the vendor received it, they quick called her and said, hey, you requested this logo. We've never done this design before. We're going to have to charge you a little bit more for that. Let's say Alicia agreed, and now it's showing up on our invoice. With AX 2012, we now support the ability to enter non-PO lines right on this particular invoice. That is new. If you think back to AX 2012, if something like that had shown up on our invoice, you either had to go back to the purchase order and add it there and reconfirm it there so that it would default in, or you could add it as a miscellaneous charge. Or if you had non-PO invoices, you could also use the journals. Well, now it's pretty easy to add these lines. All you have to do is click the Add Line function, and I'll go ahead and add this. This supports non-stocked lines, so we'll just go ahead and we'll say it was $100. And that is really as easy as it is. The goal of this is really to allow April to work from this one form, this central place, all day long, so that she doesn't need to separate out the invoices anymore according to our forms in AX. Again, think back to AX 2009. Those non-PO purchases had to be in the journals. We do still have the journals. There's still support, so don't worry that we've taken that away. But now she can just work from this one location. Another thing I wanted to point out to you is kind of right here in the middle, I'll circle around this. It's called invoice grouping. We have the ability to group or batch your invoices together with AX 2012. You can group by username, by user date, or by a custom whatever you want to call it, custom field. The purpose of this, it might be, what would be a good example? Let's say you're in April that works in a large accounts payable processing center and you're heads down all day entering in your invoices. At the end of your shift, you want to post them all. You could certainly set this up so that your name, April, was on there, and then at the end of your shift, you could go to the pending vendor invoices list page and you could go ahead and just post those that were assigned to you. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, we have received some questions about this. People are wondering if there is a total associated with this group. And the short answer is no, there is not. The example that customers have given me since we've rolled this out is, for instance, they may have a stack of invoices and typically they'll run a calculation and they'll know, they'll have a computer tape or a calculator tape on that. They know the total that they're working towards, and they'd like to input that total with the group. And then as they're entering invoices in Dynamics AX, they want us to calculate against that running total. It is a great suggestion. Unfortunately, we don't have that in the product yet at this point, but it is something we are tracking as a suggestion, definitely, for future release. Okay, just a quick poll here. Is anyone in the audience familiar with the term arranging or summarizing the invoice from version 4? I see one person back there. Yep, another person here. Few people. It doesn't surprise me. We've had this capability in the product, and it was one of the things that we tested in those usability studies. Remember I said we brought in some Aprils and some Phyllis personas to test. And quite honestly, it failed miserably. Our participants could not find the functionality. A couple of them did stumble into the functionality, but they couldn't even figure out how to use it. And it's just a great tool. Arranging or summarizing allows you to merge multiple purchase orders on a single invoice. It's perfect for those situations where maybe you order, you have 10 POs with a vendor over the last month. At the end of the month, they just send you one invoice, a billing for all 10 of them. That's the type of situation you'd want to use it in. So we kind of went back to the drawing board then and said, okay, we definitely have a problem if people can't find this functionality. And as we watched the studies, those Aprils were saying things like, oh, I just want to add another purchase order. I'm looking for a link to PO, that type of thing. And what we landed on was just a simple link here. It's called Add Another Purchase Order. I'll open up this form. We'll expand it out a bit. And what you see here are all the open purchase orders for this particular vendor with the same currency that I'm dealing with. So you see the purchase orders on this side of the form, and then you can see the lines from those purchase orders on this side of the form. Let's go ahead. I'll just mark the purchase order 407. It has an office chair on it. If it had multiple lines on it, I could pick and choose which lines I wanted to bring over. All right, let's just click OK, and you should see that line added to my vendor invoice. And you can see the purchase order number in the line section. So you can see I have my office chair for 407 added successfully. I'm going to just go ahead and remove that, though. I don't want to work with that for this demo. Now, I promised that I would touch on the taxes in this situation. So remember, I asked you to think about $50 of tax for these work shirts. Let's say this is another example of something that doesn't match the paper copy of my invoice. Let's say the paper copy, the vendor calculated $49.99. Now with AX 2009, you can change that right here on the header of this vendor invoice. We'll go into the sales tax form. This form shows you the first line is actually coming from that non-PO line that I had added. And then the second line is the one for my work shirts. It's the second line we want to focus on. I'll go to the adjustment tab. And for my actual sales amount, all I have to do is override the $50 to $49.99, and you'll see the total sales tax will change, as well as we calculate, we store a Boolean to let you know whether you've overridden or not. I'll go ahead and apply that. We'll close the form, and just to show you that that worked, we'll go back to the sales tax form on the line, and you can see $49.99 was the total actual sales amount. What it calculated is also shown here, so you always have a comparison between the two. Now, additionally, any accounting distributions are automatically changed as well, so the accounting distributions also reflect that penny that we no longer have on there. All right, when you are done with your invoice, you can either save it, you can post it, or you can print it. Of course, posting is the most common thing that you would be doing. We have made, I guess, there's a new feature in AX 2012 concerning the posting. If you think of your posting in AX 2009 or other versions, the posting to the general ledger happens automatically right away. And we've had feedback from people that they would like the ability to postpone or kind of put that posting on hold, if you will, and delay it. And people want to do that for performance reasons. They want to wait and post until they have the resources available on the server. So we have offered now the ability, you can either post synchronously, that's the default, that's what you have in AX 2009 and version 4, or you can choose to post asynchronously. And posting asynchronously effectively puts that transaction, the journalization of it, on hold, so it doesn't post to general ledger until the resources are freed up on the server. So let's recap what we've seen in terms of the vendor invoice entry. See if I can remember all of it. We saw the new user interface. We saw invoice grouping, PO linking. We saw the tax adjustments. And we saw the ability to enter non-PO lines on these vendor invoices. I know that's a lot to digest in just a short time so early in the morning, but just if you even walk away, just remembering our goal really was to provide April with this central location and really making her day-to-day efficiency much better. Now, we're going to move on to a different topic. Let me get my slides back. We are going to talk about invoice matching. And before I really leap into the invoice matching section, though, I really want to refresh your memory on what we have in AX 2009 for those of you that have that product, and maybe you're not even aware that we have invoice matching there. What we have in AX 2009 is a three-way matching concept where we match the purchase order, the packing slip or product receipt to the invoice. So just taking a real quick example of that, let's say that we have a PO line entered with a quantity of 1,000 and the unit price is $1 each. Goods arrive and then we get the invoice. And let's say that invoice unit price is different. Let's say it's $1.10. If we assume that we have a company policy that's set to allow a 5% tolerance, that would mean anything up to $1.05 in this scenario would be perfectly acceptable. But since our $1.10 is over that 5% tolerance, the line would be flagged as having a matching discrepancy in AX 2009. So that's what we have for three-way matching. That still applies. We still have all of that capability, but we also have some additional features that I'm going to show you. So when we launched AX 2009, we got a lot of feedback, different scenarios that were given to us that were kind of outside of that three-way matching area. And the most common one that I received was the idea that service items should not have to be three-way matched. You know, you really don't care about those quantities on service items, and that makes perfect sense. So in AX 2012, we've introduced a concept called matching policies. And you can set up the matching policy at your legal entity or your company level, and then you can override that policy at the vendor level, at the item level, or even as granular as per item, per vendor. So let's launch back into the product, and I would want to show you this. I want to show you an example of two-way matching. And let's go to, oh, there we go. Thank you, Christy. I want to take you into the accounts payable setup area. Accounts payable parameters, just as in AX 2009, that's where you enable matching for your company. It's in the invoice validation tab. And for those of you not familiar with where you enable this, there's just simply a checkbox at the top that turns on matching capability. Now, what's new in AX 2012 is this line matching policy. And I know for those of you in the back, you can't see any of it, so I'll explain what you can set those values to. You can set it to not required, two-way, or three-way. And again, this is the default for your company, which can be overridden. Not required simply means there's no verification of the individual invoice prices to the purchase order prices or any of the quantities back to the packing slips. Two-way matching does the verification, but it's only comparing the PO and the invoice. So that's perfect for those service items where you really don't care about the quantities. And then, of course, three-way is just what we had described on that slide before, where all three documents are involved. So let's take a look at this with an example. Let's say that for your company, as a general rule, you allow two-way matching. But let's say anytime you bring on a new vendor, you want to subject them to strict matching for 6 months, kind of a probationary period, if you will. So you want them to have three-way matching. So to set this up, I would set my company policy as two-way matching, and we'll close this. And if you recall, I said that you can override these policies. It's under Setup, Invoice Matching, Matching Policy. With this form, you can see the defaulting company policy comes in here. And I'm going to set the override to vendor. All of my vendors are displayed here. And all I have to do is click on the vendor. Let's say my vendor 1003 is a brand new vendor in my system. I want them to have 6 months where they have to do three-way matching. All I have to do is change that to three-way matching. That will ensure that for this vendor, I'll need to subject them to three-way matching. All other vendors in the system only have two-way. And we can take a look at that here with the purchase orders. Let's just go ahead and create a new purchase order for this vendor. And for 1003 as my vendor, I'll just quickly enter in an item here. It's in the line details. You'll see a new field on the PO in the Setup tab. It's at the bottom of the form. There's an invoice policy now, and this is set to three-way matching. It defaulted in again from that setup area we were just in. If I real quickly, I'll just take another vendor, and we should see two-way default. Let's go back to setup. Whoops, I have to enter in a line first, I guess. That'd be good. If we look at the setup, that other vendor defaulted to two-way. So that's the concept behind that matching policy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we rolled out AX 2009, we did get a lot of feedback from our customers, and there were a lot of interesting scenarios that we saw, and it quickly became very evident that customers had scenarios outside of two-way matching or three-way matching, other kinds of policies that they wanted to check. And so what we came up with was a new policy rule builder, if you will. What you can do is you can choose any single field on either the invoice header or the invoice line, and you can set up conditions for the system to run matching against. And the easiest way to explain this to you is really through an example that we actually received from one of the people looking at 2009. They had a scenario where they wanted to make sure that any invoice line greater than $50,000 was flagged, couldn't be posted until it was approved, because typically their lines would be like for $500, even $50, but $50,000 was really outside of their range. So they wanted the system to be able to do that. That's really outside of what we had for options for three-way and two-way matching. So we came up with this new policy builder, and I'd like to show you that with an example real quickly. I'll close out of this purchase order window. And first thing I want to do before I forget, because I don't want to allow posting, I'm going to go back into the matching area. You can either post invoices with discrepancies. You can set that to require approval so that if you have a matching discrepancy on your invoice, it will fail posting every time. Someone has to go in and approve it. I have my system set up right now to just allow with warning. That means I could post. For this particular demo, I want to say I want posting to fail if there's a matching discrepancy. So I'll just set that real quickly. Now these matching policies, I've set up a little bit of this already in my system just for time's sake. What we have here is a nice form where you can go in and create all the policies that you want to create. Basically, you just name your policy. These policies can be assigned to, oh, let me go in here. I think I did a little jumping there. These policies can be assigned to one or more legal entities. So for instance, maybe it makes perfect sense in only one of your companies that you would have a policy like I had described where a line couldn't be over $50,000. Maybe all of your other companies have very large purchase order lines on them, and that policy would make no sense in those. So I've set up this particular policy to apply just to the company that I'm in. And the real heart of this functionality is at the bottom of the form. Here's where you create your policy rule. I'll just go ahead and select. Remember I had said you can choose any header or line field that you want to, so I'm going to show you where that comes into play. So I could open this up for you. And you can see I have literally dozens and dozens of fields. I'm on the line view. I could pick anything on my line that I care about, that I want to be notified about right here through this drop list. Now I happen to know that I want to use net amount, so I'll just type in net amount, and remember I want to have nothing in there greater than 50,000. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that. And we'll put in a policy description, invoice policy violated. We'll click OK. And that's all we have to do for the setup of that. Now let's go see this in action. We'll go to the area page. Oh, get my mouse back again. And I'll go back to that pending vendor invoice list page, and we'll create a new invoice. I'm going to add a line that's greater than $50,000 so that you can see this in action here. We'll put it for $51,000. And I'll just go ahead and post, and we should fail posting in this case. We should receive an error message. And indeed, we did. It said this vendor invoice cannot be processed because it contains invoice policy violations. Someone with the authority to approve that could certainly go in and look at it. Now, in that example from the 2009 customer, it probably truly was that I had keyed in the information. The manager could go ahead and fix that for me, or if it truly was something that was $51,000, they could approve that. As soon as they approve it, then you would be able to post it. That just gives you kind of a flavor of that, the power of that invoice policy builder. So that's all I have in terms of invoice matching. So if we recap, I guess the key message I would want you to remember is that you have a lot of options now with AX 2012. With AX 2009, we kind of started, we had our footprint, we had the three-way matching, which was really nice, but we've added the matching policy now, which would take care of those service items that need the two-way matching. We also have this invoice policy builder. There are two other matching features that I didn't talk about today. We have a totals matching, which is a real lightweight matching that you could also enable in 2012. And we have an extended price matching as well. So you're really in the driver's seat now when it comes to matching. And I hope you'll find those features very beneficial. So with that, I think I will hand it over to Christy finally. And we'll get our slides back here. Oh, maybe I'll let you do that, Christy. Okay. I won't crawl over.
And I need to get my computer back awake. Okay, thank you, Annette. Now we're going to dig into accounts receivable, and we're really going to focus on three primary areas for the accounts receivable module that were introduced. The first one we're going to look at is specifically around the free text invoice. And what we're going to take a look at is, number one, the template capability that we introduced. What this is useful for are situations where you don't have inventory, of course, involved, but things such as fees, like subscription fees that you want to bill your customers for on a recurring basis. And then from there, we're going to also take a look at the correction of a posted free text invoice. And I'm actually going to do that as part of the demo after I post a template invoice. You could, of course, also do the correction on a regular free text invoice that's not created through a template. So for our template, we see at the bottom here just a kind of quick walkthrough of the basic setup we have to define in the system. The first thing we need to do is create the template itself. Then from there, we need to assign that template to one or more customers to whom it's relevant. And then from there, we have the third step, which is to actually process the template against the relevant customers. And then, as I was saying, we're going to take a fourth step and just take a look at how do I do a correction once that free text invoice has been posted. So we're going to jump right back into AX, which is good. Maybe my computer will warm up my hands a little bit. It's a little cold in here. Okay, so we're going to first take a look at the setup of the template. And this is located in Accounts Receivable under Setup. And you can see I already do have one template created, but I'm going to create a second one. So we have one for a subscription fee that we already have assigned to one or more of our customers in the system. but maybe I have a second subscription. Maybe I have a second magazine or newspaper that's relevant to my customers. So really, we could address that in a couple ways, which is we could add a new line onto this template for the customers to whom it's relevant to have the 2 subscription fees. But maybe it's really better to actually create a new one because maybe some customers have one but not the other. So we obviously don't want to have 2 subscription fees charged to those for whom it's not relevant. So we're going to go ahead and create a new one here, and I'll just call this a magazine fee. And really what we're seeing here is the free text invoice really dumbed down. So you can see we don't have a lot of the information that you normally would see on the header of the actual free text invoice, but it's the basic information that you would want to default when the free text invoice is created. And keep in mind that the information that's on the template will also work in combination with the settings defined on the customers themselves when we create the actual invoice. So some of this information we can choose to leave blank because it will come from the customer. Others you could choose to define. And when we actually get to the second step of assigning the template to the customer, we can see that there is also an option for some customers to override the settings from the template with the settings from the customer itself. So let's go ahead. We're going to leave most of this information blank. I'll just kind of expand here. You can see also there's a lot of the same information around the terms of payment, the cash discounts. We're going to leave all of that blank. We can define the financial dimensions also here. Remember, of course, we haven't assigned this to a customer, so there are no defaults. But if it would be relevant, we could go ahead and fill in the appropriate financial dimensions. Also want to point out the template. So Annette showed us on the purchasing scenario where we could create that template. I believe hers was for a campaign. And we could actually do a similar thing on the sales side. And really where the template is powerful is, unlike an allocation account, you can use that template across all kinds of documents. So if Annette's template is relevant to myself for this sales scenario, I could assign it here, and it will actually be used for my revenue accounts on my free text invoice. We're going to leave it blank, and we're just going to jump right down here into the line, and we'll add our line that's relevant. And we'll get in our service revenue account. We'll leave our taxes all blank. And we'll just go ahead and put in our $15 amount for our template. And of course, again, we can go ahead and add additional lines. So this is just like a free text invoice, except it's not relevant to a specific customer yet at this point. A couple other things to point out at the top is you can add miscellaneous charges to the header. And also, if you do want to look at the customers who are assigned this template, there's a nice handy button at the top to let you see that list of customers to whom I've already assigned it. Obviously, this is a new one, so it won't show anyone at this point. But where this really comes in handy is if you haven't used a template yet and you've assigned it to some customers and you realize it was wrong, you do need to unassign that template from the customer before you can come in here and delete it. So that's a nice little tool for you to go in and see quickly who to go and remove the template from. All right, so we are done with our template. The next step is to assign it to our customer. So from here, I'm going to go to the customer list page. And let's just sort on the customer account because I'm going to add it to Forest Wholesales. And we can do this a couple different ways. I could double click and go into the customer detail page, or I could go directly here on my action pane. You can see on the invoice tab, there's an option here for recurring invoices. I'll go ahead and select this. And I did this specifically because I wanted to point out that this customer is already assigned that template that I had previously defined in the system. So we can see here that the customer can have one-to-many templates assigned to them. We don't restrict it to just one. So I'll go ahead and say new, and I want to assign our new magazine fee template to this customer. And then some important pieces of information we need to define. Number one is, when do I start the actual billing of this customer? So maybe their magazine subscription starts today. I could go ahead and fill in today, or maybe it starts 2 months down the road, or maybe it started actually 4 months ago. You can also post date this. And what the system will do is if I put in a date such as January 1st, When I go and I do my first run of my template for the invoices, it will recognize, have I actually created the invoices for that customer in those historical months? And if it doesn't see that information, those invoices there, it will create them. So for our example, we're just going to use today. So I'll put today's date in. Next thing we have to talk about is the recurrence. How often do I actually send the invoice to this customer? Daily basis, monthly basis, yearly basis? I'll go ahead and say month, and I will do it every 1 month. Some more important information. How often or at what point do I stop the recurrence? And we are pretty flexible with the settings here. What you can do is you can say I have no end date, and of course you could come in here always and put an end if for some reason the customer does cancel the subscription. You could define a specific end date, or you can even put an amount. So I could say I only want to invoice this customer up to $1,000. And as soon as that $1,000 threshold has been met, no more invoices will be created for the customer. All right, we're going to leave it at no end date. And from here, our last setup options that we have to look at are the setting I was talking about a little earlier on the template. Do I want to use the settings from the template for things such as the cash discount that I define or the payment terms that I define? So here we can say either use the settings from the template or override that and use it from the customer themselves. So we have that flexibility. Let's go ahead and set ours to the customer. And just a couple other little tidbits of information. You can see there's an activity tab to show you at the bottom the last time the invoice was generated against this customer for this template. We also have history at the top if you want to see a complete history of all the documents that were generated, again, for the combination of this customer with the template that's selected. All right, we are ready to create some invoices. So under accounts receivable and then periodic, we have generate recurring invoices. So this is done through a process, and we're going to go ahead and I'll just put in today's date. You can see here you can pick the specific template you'd like to create the invoice for. We're going to choose our new template that we just defined. I'll go ahead and click OK here, and this is going to chug through the system and go through all the customers and see which customers are relevant for the specific template. Also, while this is running, you can see there's a select button. So if you really do need to pinpoint this process a little bit more to specific customers, you can use that query capability and go in and define one or more specific customers to run this process against. All right, success. We have our template has been used to create our invoice. The one thing that I want to point out here is that I know this is really small, so there is a group number that's attached to this process. So what that means is now if I go in and look at post-recurring, this is kind of like a batch. And this is really useful because it can be used, and we'll see this in the list page, to identify all of the documents that were created together as a result of the process that we just ran. So here's our batch, kind of like our header, kind of like a journal situation. If we go to lines, think of this kind of like a journal. It's not the actual line, but it's the individual invoices that were created. So here's our one invoice that was created for our customer for $15. Now some of you might be asking, well, why didn't you get a second invoice for that second template? It's because I already had created an invoice for that template, I don't know, maybe 10 days ago. Well, I wasn't to the next month yet for my next invoice for that template. So it did not create that second invoice because the system recognized it was already there for the month of March. All right, we can look at the details. From here, this will go ahead and open up the free text invoice window. And we will come back and take a look at this in a little bit more detail because as Annette pointed out on the vendor invoice, free text invoice has also changed from a UI perspective. We do have some powerful things here though. If for some reason you need to make an edit to this, maybe it shouldn't have been $15, maybe this one time we need to change the amount on the invoice, we can go ahead and make overrides to what actually was created through the template process. So we'll change that to $16. I'll go ahead and refresh here so we can see our invoice total is now 16. You can look at the totals if you want. So this is just like looking at the totals in the header of your document. We're going to go ahead and just post this. All right, so we were successful. We'll close out of here. And now what we want to do is we're going to go to, let me scroll up here, our free text invoice list page. And what I want to show up here is a couple things. Number one, if we scroll over here, I've got a lot open, and our resolution is not the best, but you can see here there is a new column that we added in the list page, specifically for the recurrence ID. So here's where you can come in, you can do filters, and you can say filter it down to just the invoices that were created for that batch that was defined for the process. So you can see that information here. And now what we're going to do is take a look at corrections. So let's go ahead and pull up this invoice that we just created. And again, this doesn't have to be an invoice that was created through a template. I could have chose any invoice that we had defined in the system. And we're now going to take a look at the correction capability. And before we take a look at this, one thing I need to make sure everyone understands is that this functionality is tied to a configuration key. So you can choose to enable this functionality or not enable it. So if you do have 2012 loaded and you're saying to me, Christy, I don't see this button, it's because you don't have your configuration key turned on for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a correction. I have that already turned on. So here is my invoice. And we can see here up at the top in our action pane, and let me make this bigger so you can see it a little better, is we have a new option called Correct Invoice. So this is what you might be missing if you don't have this turned on. And we're going to choose our reason code, and I'll just say it's an error. What date do you want to reverse? And we're going to say Create Corrected Invoice. Now what the system did behind the scenes is it actually created a copy of the original invoice. And it hasn't actually posted anything yet. But when we're done making the correction to this document, two things are going to happen. Number one is it will create a credit memo, which is an exact copy of the original invoice using that reversing date that we just defined in that little drop dialog box. And the second thing that's going to happen is it will post this new corrected invoice that we see on the screen right now. Also, one thing to point out, in the very upper left corner of the window is there is some text there to actually tell you you are on the correcting invoice. This is the new invoice that you are making the edit to. So we're going to change this to I need to go into edit mode. $17, because that's our new corrected amount. So while we're in here, let's talk a little bit about the free text invoice. So similar to what Annette showed, we have the same concept of the line view and the header view. The line view is, again, the default. It will show some very basic pieces of information from the header, but not all of the information from the header. So just really the pieces that we found people edit most often. And then underneath the header, of course, we have the lines themselves. Just like on the vendor invoice, we have the line detail underneath it. And I'll just show here on the financial dimensions, we have that template ID, just like we talked about. We have the financial dimensions themselves. So all of that is really mirrored on the accounts payable and the accounts receivable side. And just like Annette showed on purchasing, I can go to the header view and take a look at all of the detail of the header if I need to make some edits here. We're going to go ahead and leave that the same. Also, accounting distributions. We also did implement this functionality onto the free text invoice. So we also have the ability to come in here. I could have applied the template. Otherwise, I could manually come in here and actually split, in this case, the revenue instead of the expense. Have the revenue be split across multiple branches or cost centers or whatever my financial dimensions are comprised of. So we'll leave all of this as a default. Now, the one thing that Annette didn't show you is the accounting distributions, if you remember, are not the accounting, right? It's just one half of the accounting entry, and that's really focused more towards the operations side to really say who is either consuming the item, if it's on the purchasing side, or in our case, who is actually receiving the credit for the revenue. But we do have situations, of course, where you have an accountant. How many of you are accountants? I like to see my debits, my credits, right? And I want to make sure they balance, and I want to know what I'm posting to. And that is one thing we did introduce in AX 2012, and this is actually my feature, so I'm really excited about it because, look, I can see my debits and credits, and everyone says, hallelujah. So this is a really cool feature. Now you can actually come in and see, prior to posting your transaction, what is my revenue, what is my accounts receivable, and we can see that information, validate it. If something is incorrect, really what that means is one of two things. Number one, your customer posting profile is incorrect, because if your accounts receivable is wrong, that's where that's defaulting from. Or number two, your revenue is incorrect, which means you just have to go back to your accounting distribution window and make the appropriate edits. Now, one other thing I want to just show you here is we're going to mix a little bit of GL into this just to make sure everyone understands how we've really added some functionality that work between the two. So I'm going to go into my distributions, and I'm actually going to split this revenue across two of my branches. I'll have some go to Minneapolis, some go to LA. Let's have Minneapolis get 40% of the revenue. LA will get 60%. Okay, I'm going to close this. I just want to go back to my subledger journal. Remember, this is my accounting entry. And see immediately how the system updated my accounting entry. It recognized the split for my revenue. But also look at the split of the accounts receivable. And I just want to show you a very important setting in general ledger parameters, because depending on your situation, how your company is defined, you may or may not want that. So how many of you, if you think about 2009, if you think what it does is the accounts receivable actually pulls the financial dimensions from your header's financial dimension tab. So we now have an option in the system. So let me close this. I'm going to jump to GL and go into general ledger parameters. And under ledger here, we have a new section called accounting rules. And we have a very important setting here, which says, what values do I use for my summary account? And you can see here you have two options. And what this is saying is either pull the financial dimensions for accounts receivable or accounts payable. This is also relevant to the vendor invoices. Either from the accounting distributions, which is what we saw, or pull it from the source document, which means the header. So if we switch this to source document, save it. If I go back to my free text invoice and look at my subledger journal, you can see immediately the system consumes that new accounting policy that was defined, and now our customer balance is not split across my branch that I defined on my accounting distributions. You can see my branch is actually blank because that's the value that's on the header of my document. Okay, so we've made our correction. We've looked at the distributions. We've looked at the subledger journal entry. A couple other quick things before we post. We did introduce the concept of a quantity and a unit price onto the free text invoice. If you do want to get down to that level of granularity, this is completely optional. If you want, you can actually remove this. So if I don't want a quantity at all, I could blank it out. It really depends on what you want to see on your printed document, if it's relevant. Okay, let's post this. And you can see here when this posts, we're going to get a little message that tells us what the two things that occurred. Number one is it created that canceling invoice, that credit memo, and then it created the new correcting memo, or the new corrected invoice. One thing that's also important is you can do corrections on invoices that have been settled already. So what the system will do is if this invoice had been settled by a payment, it will actually unsettle it from the original invoice, and it will take that settlement and it will actually apply it to the new corrected invoice that was created. So it will also fix up that settlement information if it exists in the system for you. All right, let's close out of here. And we'll jump back to our slides. So we've taken a look at templates, at corrections. Remember, corrections is tied to a configuration key, and you can do it on any free text invoice. Not just those created through the template itself. Last thing we're going to look at is collections. How many of you have collection agents in your company? How many of you have collection agents that really have a difficult time with all the paper and finding information that they need that's relevant for collecting against those customers? Yeah, when we do customer site visits with the Connie persona, it's really interesting to see all the sticky notes and the folders, and that's really a lot of the pain points that we heard from the Connie persona is that there's so much information to consume, but yet it's not really all centralized, and there's really not a good way to organize that information. So we have introduced a new collections management module, And we're going to take a look at just some pieces of it. We're going to take a look quickly at some interest changes that were made in the system, the aging periods, the collections list page, and then of course from there the collections detail, which is a new form that we have introduced. So let's get back into AX. All right, so we have a few things under the setup we'll take a look at really quickly. So under collections, in the setup area, we have collection letters. Those haven't changed, so we won't take a look there. Interest, we'll take a look here. Interest did exist, of course, in AX 2009, but we have made some really nice enhancements to the interest area. Number one is date effectivity. So if you do have scenarios where your interest that you're charging your customers is 1% for this fiscal year, but you communicated to your customers that next year it will change to 1.5%. We do have data effectivity, so you can actually maintain the historical information and also the new setup. So the system is smart enough, of course, to consume the correct interest charge based on the document that you're charging the interest against. So we have the data effectivity. We have a few other things here where we can calculate not only on the day and the month, but we also introduced the calendar day. So you could actually choose to have a specific date on the calendar defined. So you could say on the 15th of every month, go ahead and calculate the interest. Some additional things at the bottom here is we did introduce mins and maxes. So if you always at a minimum charge, €1 for interest, you can go ahead and define that as a minimum interest amount. You could also say a maximum, so if you never charge more than €20, you can define that for your maximum. So those have all been introduced new into the interest area. We'll close out of here. And then from here we have customer pools and customer agents. These really work together. Let's take a look at customer pools first. It's pretty common with a lot of the collection agents that we have talked with, where they're responsible for just a subset of customers. It's pretty common where I might be responsible for customers in the East, Annette may be responsible for customers in the West. What you can do is define customer pools, which are just basically a query to get down to a group of your customers. So you can see here I have a couple pools already defined. We have one for all, which will go ahead and pick up all customers that we have in the system. We have specifically for the East or for large customers, any customer that is maybe 180 days or older with some of their invoices. So all you're doing here is you're basically defining a query of the customers that are relevant to that pool. Once your pools are defined, and those are optional, you don't have to do that. Once you have the pools defined, we also introduced a concept of a collection agent. So once the pools are there, you can come in here and actually define your collection agent. You can see here I have a few agents already defined in the system. Connie is probably my manager because you can see that Connie has access to a lot of the pools, all of the customers. One thing I really want to point out and stress in this window though is this is not security. This is really just a filter capability. This is just really to enhance the usability of the collections windows for your collection agents. It doesn't prevent them, though, from actually potentially seeing a different customer that they're not responsible for the collection on. It's just a filter. Okay, so we've got the filter here, and one last thing to just point out is you do have also a default pool. So if I'm Connie and I always want to default to my East pool when I'm in the collection list page, you can go ahead and define that default here also. Okay. Aging period definitions. This is not new, but the one thing that is new in here is the icon. We really wanted to give the user a more visual, quick glance at the collection information when those collection agents are actually in the list page. So what we've introduced is this icon where you can define a different combination of color and or symbols to quickly, when I open the list page, see at a glance which customers are past due, which ones are not past due. All right, one last important piece before we get into the guts of collections is the customer aging snapshot. This is a very important piece to remember for those of you that do utilize the collection management module. You do need to run a customer snapshot. in order to get the agings up to date. So before you go into the collection list page, depending again on how often you want this updated, you will want to come in here and quickly update your snapshot to make sure that the invoices are in the appropriate aging periods. All right, now let's take a look at our new list page and our details page. Under Common, we have a new group here for list pages called Collections. We'll go ahead and choose this. And what this is going to show us, number one, is I'm filtering by a pool. So I don't know if you remember, I did default a default setting when I was in that customer agent or the collection agent window. So you can see here it did default to a pool. Right here's our pool dropdown. If I want to choose to view a different pool based on the pools assigned to me as a collection agent, I can do that. So let's go ahead and change this to all. And I'll just sort this by my customer account so I know what customer I'm using. Again, here's our visual indicator that we saw in the collection or the aging period definition. So at a glance, we can quickly see which customers really do I need to pay attention to. So this really is going to speed up the process of identifying the relevant customers for me to look at. We are going to take a look at Sparrow Wholesales. Let's go ahead and open this one up. They have a red diamond there. Now you can see that the red diamond showed because they have at least one document that is 180 or past due beyond that. So you can see here we show in the middle of the screen the individual documents and where the status is of those individual documents within the aging period definition. So some documents you can see really are fine, they're not past due yet. We can choose to take action, of course, on the ones that are past due. So what we've done in this window, with this collections detail window, is really try to bring together all the pieces of information that Connie needs. And what we've done here is we've actually combined information from 14 different windows. This used to be 14 separate windows in AX 2009, and we brought all of that information together into one location for Connie so that she's much more efficient and can really collect against these customers at a quicker pace. Okay, so the middle of our window is really the heart of it, right? This is where we see the open invoices and really the status of those documents, whether they're past due or not. But then, of course, we have a lot of additional actions that Connie needs to take, right? So she may need to have some activities against this customer. And we can see here at the bottom, I already do have one activity. She already did have an NSF that was against one of the payments. So I can see that information against the collection that I've tried to do for Connie already. Maybe that's why she's past due, is because the check bounced. We can go ahead and add new activities. So maybe I need to go ahead and send, let's see, who is our contact? Let me just expand here. Jose. So Jose is our contact at this customer. So I'm going to go ahead and send Jose an email. And I'll just put some detail in here. We'll just say we need to send this ASAP, and then maybe Jose told us check is in the mail. So you can see here as soon as we added that activity, I now have that down below. We are actually consuming the activities framework that is available through CRM. So where this is really useful is that the appropriate salespeople for this customer are also aware of the activities that are happening against this customer for the collection side. And that's really important, of course, because they want to make sure that they're not selling more to this customer if they really have a large past due balance. So we can see here at the bottom with the activities, you can also choose to show open or closed or the origin. So right now I'm looking at just the collection activities, but if I change this to all, if there were activities that were defined against a customer in CRM, I could also see that information in this collection window. So it really gives great visibility between all of the different personas that are communicating with this customer. All right, so we'll switch that back. And then the other thing we did also uptake is the case framework, because we really wanted to make sure that Connie had the capability to kind of mimic that manila folder, right? You know, where she sticks all the invoices that are relevant for just that email that she's trying to collect the specific invoices for. So if I go ahead and choose, I didn't want to drill down, choose the line. Let's say it's only relevant for the one invoice that's past due. I can go ahead and assign this to a case. And I could choose an existing case. So if I had already spoken with Jose about another past invoice, I could go ahead and add a second invoice to that case. In our situation, we only have the one. So we'll leave this here, and we'll just call this collection. And we'll choose to assign it to the case. And now when I come into this window at a later point in time, underneath the customer at the top, I now have the ability to filter this down to just specific cases. So if I only want to see case number 2, which maybe is a different set of invoices, I can again choose that filter and really filter it down to just that. So we can see here, now it's just letting me focus on what's relevant to the case. Okay, so a few other things. We have at the top of the window, we've got our action pane that you see on a lot of the other windows in the system. You know, while we did take information from 14 different locations and put it in here, there's still going to be situations where you may need to drill back, of course, to other windows and find additional information. So we do have all the actions at the top. You can see here you can go to the transactions. If you do need to go and actually settle a payment, if you receive something from the customer that you've contacted, you can do that. You can go to your aging period definitions. You can go ahead and open that up. There's a lot of different pieces of information. You can look at the collection letter journals, the interest journals, anything that's really relevant to the collection against this customer. One other thing that we added in the middle section here is also the ability to do write-offs. So I know that this customer has a really large balance and probably don't want to write off quite that much, but maybe we truly are in a situation where this customer just can't pay. So we're going to go ahead and choose to write off this information. So before I do that, let's just make sure. I think we talked about the action pane, all of our things. We have, of course, the little fact boxes at the side. We've talked about the activities. So I think we're going to go ahead and write this off. And once again, we can put in a write-off date. We have the reason codes that we're being consumed here, so we can define that information that's relevant. You can see it did default for us. And then from here, we can click OK. Now, what is happening in the system is typically Connie should not have the authority to do what I just did, right? You know, she shouldn't have the authority to write it off. So we don't immediately do a write-off transaction for the customer. What we do is we create a general journal to actually document the write-off of this customer's balance. Because we do recognize that there's going to have to be some other persona that goes in, you know, maybe the CFO or the accounting manager would have to go in and actually look at that information and approve it before it actually is posted into the system. So we'll go ahead and close that, and we'll just quickly jump over to GL. And I'll just show you here in General Ledger. Here we have a new journal that was created for our write-off. If we take a look at the lines, there's all of our information. So you can see it's writing off the customer's balance, and it also is going to the appropriate write-off ledger account. This ledger account is defaulting from the customer's posting profile. That was introduced there also. So for that, we've actually walked through all the collections. We've taken a look at the write-off capability. I think we're ready to jump back to the presentation and wrap things up. Okay, so to wrap things up, what Annette and I are going to do is just quickly give you some of our top tips of the different areas that we've talked about today. And then I think we have a few minutes hopefully left for some Q&A.
All right. Top tip number 1 is that your vendor invoice entry now does support those non-PO lines. They need to be non-stocked or category-based lines. And just a note with that, some people have asked, is free text, can I just type things in at random? That's not supported. It does need to be something that you've set up before as a non-stocked item or as a category-based item. We talked about invoice grouping, and the most popular question, again, that I had shared with you that I was asked was whether they can enter in a group total associated with that invoice group. The answer is no, that's not supported, but again, that's something we are tracking. Gains are notable if you use the functions off of the invoice to create the invoice based on either your purchase order, or remember even in AX 2009 we added the ability to default based on those packing slips or product receipts. Two-way matching has now been introduced in 2012. Very handy, particularly for the service items. And when you upgrade from AX 2009, the matching policy will come forward on your PO lines, and it will automatically be set to three-way matching for you during that upgrade process. You can certainly change that if you want to take advantage right away of two-way matching. It's editable. And then one thing I forgot to tell you, so we'll just mention that right now. We talked a lot about invoice matching. We do have now an out-of-the-box workflow that you can run against the matching results. So for example, let's say you have three-way matching turned on, and every time you encounter a matching discrepancy, maybe the accounting manager is supposed to approve it. Right out of the box now, you can set up a workflow condition to detect those invoice matching discrepancies and automatically route that invoice to your manager for you.
Okay, and on the accounts receivable side, we did look at some functionality that is specific to the free text invoice that I just wanted to remind everyone about. Corrections, the recurring invoice templates, the line level settlements, which we didn't really have time to get into today, but if anyone is interested in that, just contact me after. And then also the accounting distributions and the subledger journal entry, the ability to see that accounting entry. So that was introduced specifically to the free text invoice, but these four are not in the customer invoice that you create from the sales order. And again, you know, we do get a lot of questions of, are you going to put that in the sales order customer invoice? No guarantees as to when it will happen, but of course we definitely are looking to the future and making sure that we are meeting the appropriate scenarios. So this is something, yes, we will be looking at for the future, potentially to introduce these also into the customer invoice. The corrections that we have on the free text invoice are enabled through a configuration key. So make sure that if you aren't seeing that option available to you on that action pane at the top, you need to go and enable that configuration key. You can use the corrections option to now create automatically a credit memo, which is an exact copy of the original, to reverse the original invoice, and then a new correcting invoice will be created. You just have to, again, look at the different business requirements around your company as to identify whether that's relevant or not. I know that there are some countries that are very restrictive as to what type of corrections can be done. So that's why it is tied to a configuration key. You just need to evaluate your business requirements. You can adjust the write-off for a customer or an invoice through the general journal. So we did see how that general journal did flow when I did the write-off on the invoice. The one thing I didn't show is you could have actually modified that amount. So maybe you aren't going to allow the customer to write off the full invoice amount, but just a portion of it. You can adjust the amount in that general journal, and then the system will be smart enough or intelligent to understand that just a portion of that invoice has been written off and settled. And then the last thing is make sure to really utilize those icons that we've introduced into the aging period definitions. It really does give those collection agents a much better and quicker way to identify the customers that they really need to focus on as they're getting into the collections area. Okay, and from here, the next steps, of course, please do your evaluations on the session. We really appreciate you coming, and we would love to hear feedback as to what we can do better in the future. And sessions to attend. There is a financials session after this, which really is an overview of everything financial related, not just AP and AR. Make sure to attend that. And also there is one session that is not in your brochure that we have been getting a lot of questions on. There is a charts of accounts unleashed. Had to remember what it was called. So there is a session around the chart of accounts changes and the dimension changes. That is at 5 o'clock today. In room 310, it is not in your agenda anywhere. So if you are interested in information around the charts of accounts and dimensions, make sure to attend that session at 5 o'clock in room 310. And then there is also a business process session that is coming up around workflow. So make sure to attend those 3 sessions. And of course from there, take a look at our different blogs and our communities. And thank you so much for attending today. And we do have a few minutes for questions. If there are any, please make your way to the microphones if you do have a question so that we can get it recorded. Otherwise, we'll try to repeat the questions also. Any questions? Thank you. Yep, go ahead.
Does the free text invoice support intercompany?
Does the free text invoice support intercompany?
Transactions.
Correct. Did I hear you right?
Yeah.
Yep. The free text invoice does not support intercompany for AX 2012. Yeah, we still do intercompany through the journals, and then also there is the intercompany trade through the sales order, purchase order that you can do between the legal entities.
Can a collector get a view that crosses multiple companies?
Yes, can a collection cross multiple companies? Yes, that's a great question. I did not show that in the demo, but when you do your aging period definition and you run that snapshot, you can actually go in there and choose which companies to run the aging against to see the information across your companies.
Can you send nice customer statements out of that collections window view? So if you had your whole list of past due customers, just kind of press a button and automatically print the 50 or so past due customers?
Yeah, so the question again, can you send a customer statement that's relevant to the information in that collection window? Absolutely, yes. There is a lot of reporting capability. You can actually send things to Excel spreadsheets and email those to the customer. So there's really a lot of great functionality around that just to get better communication between the collection agent and the customer. Another question?
On the recurring invoices,
Yes.
is there a, I didn't see quarterly.
Say that one more time.
Recurring invoices, I saw weekly, daily, annually, I guess. I didn't see quarterly.
No, there is not quarterly, but what you could do is you could do monthly and then every 3 months. So it simulates quarterly, so it could actually recur every 3 months.
Okay, the only thing I'm not seeing in AX 2012, and we're running 4.0, is average days to pay on a customer?
Average days to pay, I believe that's on a KPI. I believe we do have that on one of the roll centers as one of the KPIs available. I don't know off the top of my head which roll center. I think Kathleen already left. But if you need that information, grab a business card or give me yours and we can get that information to you, how to see that information.
And no recurring invoices in AP?
No recurring invoices in AP.
No.
Yep,
You're
thank
welcome.
you. All great suggestions. Any more questions?
Will there be any statements for AP?
I didn't hear that one.
Yep.
Will there be any statements for AP?
Any statements for you? Can you bring the microphone a little bit closer? It's really hard to
just
hear.
like in AR, for AR we have a statement for
Okay.
customer, right? Just for my own company interest, will there be any kind of report like the statement in AR, which is for AP?
I'm not actually sure of the answer of that. I thought that we had, I'm going to have to check on that one. I really don't remember.
Yeah, I think part
It's
of it
not
too,
something new. We do have an account statement report. I don't know how well it compares to the AR report, though. I'd have to take a look at it again.
Yeah, we'd really want to understand the scenario too of where are you actually getting the statement from the vendor and you want to try to see that, match it up in the system?
Okay.
Or,
Okay, that's good
Okay.
feedback.
On your, I saw you had the disputed flags or that you could mark in AR. Does it also suppress late fees when you run late fees, or do you still have to go and mark the individual transactions not to have late fees?
I'm sorry, I didn't
The
hear that
audio
one.
is
It's
terrible up
up
here.
here.
If I mark an AR transaction to be in dispute, does it withhold that transaction from the late fee calculation?
yes, that's a very good question. One thing I did not have time to show is you can put a dispute onto an individual document, and that will actually withhold that document from things such as collection letters, interest charges. So it does actually, make sure that we are communicating again with the customer before we're charging them fees and interest. Any additional questions?
I think we're right at 10:30, Christy.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.